From the Blue Ridge Mountains to the Chesapeake Bay, Virginia is a mecca for outdoor travel and adventure. Virginia Outdoor Adventures podcast is your local guide for hiking, camping, kayaking, travel, and so much more. Get the information and the inspiration to plan your own adventure right here in Virginia. I'm your host, Jessica Bowser. Episode 70 marks a milestone for Virginia Outdoor Adventures podcast, celebrating 5 years of epic adventures across the Commonwealth. Looking back, I reflect on the incredible diversity of Virginia's outdoor offerings, from whale watching and caving to kayaking and secluded island camping. These adventures have consistently showcased experiences many listeners didn't realize existed right in their own backyards. I highlight essential spring adventures across Virginia, from waterfall hikes in Shenandoah National Park to elk viewing in Appalachia. The warming season brings excellent opportunities for paddling, wildlife viewing, boating, backpacking, and dark sky programs. As I reflect on 70 episodes of Discovery, the podcast community continues to grow, bringing outdoor enthusiasts together through shared experiences and inspirational stories. Across Virginia, listeners are discovering new adventures, planning getaways, and connecting with our state's natural beauty through each episode. Join me as we continue this journey of adventure across Virginia's remarkable outdoor spaces. Let's go! Virginia Outdoor Adventures is sponsored by the Virginia Association for Parks. VAFP champions parks across the Commonwealth. Registration for the annual conference is now live. Join us May 1st through 4th at Occoneechee State Park. This year's conference will feature a tour of Stanton River Battlefield State Park, a guided paddle program at Occoneechee, perfect for those working on Paddle Quest, and a special dark sky program at Stanton River State Park, plus special guests and speakers, workshops, and panel discussions. Meals and lodging provided, plus plenty of opportunities for conviviality around the campfire with like-minded park enthusiasts. Register for the VAFP annual conference today by clicking on Virginia Association for Parks in the show notes of your listening app. Welcome, friends, to another episode of Virginia Outdoor Adventures podcast. I'm so glad that all of you are here. There's a lot of newbies. My Instagram stories have been blowing up lately, and I'll get to why in just a moment. But I know there's a lot of new folks here who just discovered the podcast, and I wanted to say welcome. This is episode 70, and that number feels like a bit of a milestone to me. There is a well-known statistic in the podcasting industry. 90% of podcasters quit after just 7 episodes. So here I am working on episode 70, plus or minus another 10 or so unnumbered bonus episodes. So I guess it's technically closer to 80, but 70 numbered episodes. And each of those 70 plus episodes have required about 30 hours of production work apiece and equal or greater commitment to marketing and sales, because making a podcast isn't just about making it and putting it out there. That would be like throwing a party and not sending out invitations. I also have to do a lot of work to make sure that people discover it and listen to it, and that it is financially supported. So there's a lot of work that goes into every episode. And when you also throw in the constant travel that I'm doing across Virginia, it is no wonder that I am so busy. But it has been a wild ride, and some of the highlights over the last 70 episodes have been using this platform to promote volunteerism and stewardship, responsible recreating, accessibility, and of course, conservation. And I feel proud to have worked to enhance tourism and economic development here in Virginia, as well as advocacy, which is near and dear to my heart, and community engagement. And of course, I've lived some incredible adventures, things that I did not even know existed in Virginia, and maybe you didn't either. Things like whale watching and caving, zip lining and surfing, even ice climbing and camping on secluded islands, one of my favorite memories here in Virginia. But most importantly, I've introduced listeners to experiences they didn't even know existed right here in their backyards. And that was the main reason why I started this podcast. It's what got me started 5 years ago, and I'm really happy to still be here doing it. And then I wanted to say that I have gotten to know and been inspired by some of the very best public servants who work tirelessly to protect our public lands and natural resources. So shout out to our rangers, our conservation officers, wildland firefighters, wildlife biologists, and others who are protecting our public lands for all of us to enjoy. It's been a heck of an adventure. Thank you so much to all of you who have been listening, because without your listenership, none of this would be possible. Let's talk about the next episode coming up, episode 71, which has not yet been recorded because I am looking for your input. So if you have been listening for a little while, you might remember episode 34, which was foraging for wild edible plants. And that was with Tim McWelch from Advanced Survival Training. Foraging for wild edible plants was a topic that I had gotten a lot of requests for. And so I met Tim and he came on the show, and it was a wildly popular episode. And so it's been a couple of seasons now, and I recently got some requests for another topic on wilderness survival. And so I reached out to Tim and I asked him if he would be interested in coming back on the podcast to do this again, but to focus on wilderness survival skills instead. And he said, absolutely. So I talked to him the other day, and we were trying to decide what we thought the best angle would be and what people would be most interested in knowing. And we both agreed that we would like to talk about what to do if you are out hiking or somewhere outdoors and something unexpected happens, say an accident or an illness, or you get lost, or the weather changes, or something like that, that could potentially turn into an emergency. And so we're going to cover all the things to do in those situations to help ensure your safety and that you get through it. So what I need from you is what questions you have specifically for Tim. I can try to guess, but since I got a lot of requests for this topic, I want to make sure that I'm covering all the things that you all want to know. So the best way to get a hold of me to let me know what your questions are is to go to your show notes right now in your podcast listening app and click on Send Jessica a Text Message. And when you click on that, a box should open up and you can submit your questions to me. Please make sure that you put your name in there, because I would very much like to be able to say who I got the questions from. I don't need to say your last name. I just would like to know your first name. And it might also be helpful if you tell me where you're from in Virginia. I'm always interested in knowing what part of the state people are listening in from. So let me know your name, where you're from, and what questions you have about wilderness survival for Tim McWelch. And then make sure you tune in to the next episode to hear his response. Breathtaking views, towering cliffs, roaring rivers, unlimited adventure. Discover the rugged beauty of Breaks Interstate Park. Deep in the heart of Southwest Virginia, Breaks is home to the 1,000-foot vertical canyon known as the Grand Canyon of the South. Every one of my trips to the Breaks have been packed with stunning hikes in a rocky geologic wonderland, mountain biking through breathtaking scenery, and rock climbing on the Appalachian sandstone that makes Breaks a climber's paradise. But some of my most memorable moments include hearing the bugle of an elk echoing through the mountains, or staring up at the majesty of the Milky Way outstretched over towering canyon walls. Don't miss your chance to experience Appalachia's greatest conservation story. Elk have returned to Southwest Virginia, and you can experience them in their natural habitat. Reservations for this spring's elk viewing bus tours are available now. With amenities such as lakefront cottages, woodland lodges, campgrounds, and the rhododendron restaurant on site, Breaks holds epic adventures for the entire family. Your adventure awaits at the Breaks. Click on Breaks Interstate Park in your show notes to visit breakspark.com. I kicked us off by saying that there are a lot of new listeners here who recently discovered the podcast because of a series of posts that I put up in Instagram stories. And I wasn't even going to talk about it in this episode, but I got so many questions and comments and people reaching out to me about this absolutely epic bird and wildlife extravaganza that I had in Minnesota a couple of weeks ago with my good friend Matt Felperin, who's been a guest on this podcast in episode 9. Matt works for Nova Parks and is their roving naturalist. And so Matt and I were actually kayaking this past summer. And I said, you know what, Matt, there is one bird that I want to see so badly that I don't know if I will ever get a chance to see. And that is the great gray owl. The great gray owl is just absolutely majestic. The bird is huge. It's 24 to 33 inches tall is the average, with the females being bigger than the males. And they have a wingspan of, on average, 4 feet, 8 inches, but sometimes even wider. So that is a beautiful, beautiful bird with the typical owl, dinner plate, flat face. And it is so pretty, but it hangs out mostly in very, very cold northern boreal forests. And so I told Matt that I really wanted to see this bird. And he said, yeah, well, I'm going up to Minnesota in February to see it. And I was like, you're taking me with you. Yeah, I totally invited myself along. I'm not ashamed to say it. That's exactly what I did. So Matt and I and Matt's friend Joe, who I believe they've been friends since like high school or middle school or something like that. We went up to Minnesota, flew into Minneapolis. And I just want to say that Joe is an incredibly talented professional photographer. And Matt is a really talented wildlife photographer as well. Between the two of them, I got to enjoy gorgeous photos of these birds and animals that we were seeing in Minnesota. Our main destination was a place called Sax-Zim Bog, which is not very far from Duluth. And I'm still not entirely clear who manages it, but I know that there is a really active friends group there, and it's a preserve, and it's huge. I forget how many hundreds of square miles it is, but it takes like a couple of hours to drive across it. And it's a wonderful place to see wildlife. Sax-Zim Bog was where we spent most of our time, but not all of our time. It is the coldest I have ever been in my life, and I grew up in Cleveland on Lake Erie, so this is saying something. I've never seen so much snow either. It was absolutely wild. There was one morning we woke up to leave the house, and it was negative 32 degrees. And of course, we had all of our cold weather gear with us. We had toe warmers in our boots, insulated boots. We had heated gloves. We had hand warmers in our gloves. And I'm here to tell you that absolutely none of it mattered. We didn't feel anything. And I don't think I felt my toes for 5 straight days. And having toe warmers in there was like having nothing at all in there. Like you couldn't even tell it was there, even in insulated boots. It was just absolutely wild. Also, if you've ever heard folks say that temperatures can drop so low that your eyes freeze, I'm here to tell you that that's also true. Now, my eyes didn't freeze, but I felt like my eyes were freezing. It was like your eyes tear up because of the cold and then that freezes. It's the weirdest feeling. I've never felt anything like that before in my life. It was completely wild. And Matt's beard was also totally frozen. That was an interesting sight. So every guy that had facial hair, as it would breathe, it would just freeze to their beard, and then the condensation would build and freeze some more, and it just was forming these ice crystals. And Matt had like this frozen beard the whole time we were up there. It was so funny. And there are pictures of that in Instagram. And also, I will just say, so I saved all of those Instagram stories if you want to see any of this into a highlight, but it's not going to be there forever. I'm going to have to take it down at some point because it will confuse people who come across my Instagram page about Virginia outdoor adventures and then they see something from Minnesota. So I don't want to confuse people, but I will leave it up there for a little bit longer for those of you who want to see it. So get on over there and check it out. But so we went to Sax-Zim Bog. A typical day was us driving around the bog looking for different wildlife. We had a list of species that we really wanted to see. And what's interesting about Sax-Zim Bog is that it has gotten a lot of notoriety lately for wildlife watchers and birders. And so somebody got the great idea to start, what's the name of the app? Telegram or Telegraph, something like that. You guys probably know know better than I do. It's one of those messaging apps. And so somebody started a group just for the bog, and people can drop a pin at their location if there is wildlife that they're seeing that other people will be interested in. So we're driving around the bog and we're scrolling through this messaging app to see what people are seeing and where they're seeing it. And not only planning our day around where sightings have been recently, but then also like sometimes dropping everything and running to a particular location if something pops up unexpectedly. So like, for example, there was this one day that we were staked out at a bunch of bird feeders that the Friends group maintains, and we were waiting for a pine marten. And a pine marten is this long reddish brown weasel like erratic animal that would show up at the feeders every now and then. And we really wanted to see it. And of course, the guys wanted to photograph it. And so we were staked out there. It was showing up like every hour, almost on the hour, for a couple of days, except for the day that we got there, it wasn't showing up. And so we were sitting there for hours, and the guys, I got to give them credit. So I just stayed in the car because I was freezing my butt off, but they had their huge cameras and lenses on tripods, and they wanted to be ready in case it showed up. And so they would be standing out in the freezing cold with their tripods and their camera set up, like poised and ready for hours. I have no idea how they did it, but I was like, yep, okay, well, you let me know when the weasel shows up and then I'll get out of the car. So we're staked out waiting for this weasel for hours. And then all of a sudden I see people running past the car, and I'm in the back seat going, what the heck is going on? And then I see Matt and Joe running towards the car with their tripods and their cameras slung over their shoulders. And they get to the car and the hatch opens and the equipment flies in and the hatch closes and they jump in, and I'm like, what's happening? And they're like, boreal owl spotted on such and such road. We got to go. And then you just see this line of cars that had all been parked on the side of the road that were all doing the same thing we were doing, pulling out, snow's flying up everywhere. It was a complete riot. And then we would get to where somebody had dropped the pin and shared it. And then we got to see a boreal owl. It was so cool. Like, most of the birds and the animals that we saw are boreal species. And oftentimes they don't come this far south. This year was a special year. It's what's known as an eruption year. And that's eruption with an I, not an E. And an eruptive year is a year when these northern species, either their food source changes or there's an explosion in the population, something that causes them to come farther south than they normally would in search of food. So this year was an eruption year. And so there were more boreal species coming farther south, and that included the great gray owl. Now, a lot of these birds and different animals can be seen at the bog every year, but this year there were more than there usually are, which, increases your chances of actually getting to see them. So we were driving around on the first day and somebody reported a great gray. And so we were driving over to the location, and we get there, and you can always tell exactly where it is. Like, even from a mile away, you see all these cars pulled over on the side of the road. And it's funny because, like, I had always pictured myself like trudging through the snow in a boreal forest somewhere up north, like with nobody else around, looking for these birds, looking for the owl. And it was not really like that at all. I mean, there were gravel roads, but you couldn't see them because they were under so much snow. And they recommend 4-wheel drive, and they tell you not to pull too far off the road because you could get stuck. Really, it was like staying on the roads because the snow was so deep. There wasn't really an option to go off the road and go trudging around in the wilderness looking for these things. I guess if you had snowshoes, lots of people had snowmobiles, not through the bog, of course, but just like on the main roads. I saw a lot of people with snowmobiles getting around. I wonder how they do it in that kind of cold. I have no idea, but it looked like it was a lot of fun. And so people were just mostly driving around the bog on the roads and seeing what they could see from the roads. We got to see lots of different owls. We got over to where the sighting was for the great gray owl, and all these people were like on the side of the road with their cameras, and we walked up and somebody pointed out where it was. And I thought for sure I was just going to like be a sobbing mess when I finally got to see this bird. And I did not cry, which Matt pointed out a couple of days later when we were listening to the episode about forest bathing, and I was telling Anna that I thought for sure I was going to cry. And we were listening to that episode because it came out that week that we were in the bog, and he's like, you didn't cry. Good job. But I was definitely stunned. I was like, the whole thing was so surreal when you finally see this majestic animal and it's perched up on a branch and its head is swiveling from one side to another and it's looking around for food. And all these photographers and birders are lined up and everybody is pretty much silent because nobody wants to spook the wildlife or disrupt the wildlife. And so everybody's sort of tiptoeing around, but all you hear are cameras clicking. And I was so in the moment. It was so amazing to finally see this bird. Like if that wasn't good enough, then all of a sudden it leapt from its perch and it flew right towards us and it landed on a tree that was right near the road. And I look over and there's Joe laying in the snow on the side of the road with his camera up. I mean, this bird landed like right in front of him. It was so amazing. He got the most incredible shots. And then from there, it flew to our side of the road where it perched on the top of an evergreen tree. And I got some really beautiful pictures of it there too. And eventually it flew off to where nobody could see it anymore. But I mean, we were hugging and high-fiving and it was so awesome. I don't even know what to say other than it was just so incredibly awesome. And I felt very, very blessed to get to see such an awesome, awesome bird. We saw great gray owls every single day. It never got old. It was incredible every single time. We also saw, what else did we see? Oh, so one day we drove, instead of going to the bog, we drove along the coast of Lake Superior, which is beautiful, by the way. We were on our way to this little town called Two Harbors, and we stopped at Gooseberry Falls State Park. And I always love to visit state parks in other states because I like to compare them to what we have here in Virginia. And they had this massive, beautiful, what looked like brand new visitor center. It was gorgeous. Matt and I hiked to a frozen waterfall that was very impressive. I mean, I haven't seen a frozen waterfall like this before. I've seen frozen waterfalls, but this one was huge. And what was so neat about it is when we first walked up, we could walk right up to the base of it. And I thought that there was some kind of steam or like water or something rising up. But then once we got closer, we realized that the bottom of the falls was actually completely frozen. And what we were seeing was water passing underneath the ice. So the water of the waterfall was continuing to flow under the ice, and we were seeing bits of it as it was going by. And it almost looked like smoke rising until we got close enough to realize that that's not what it was. So that was really neat. I also saw a red squirrel for the first time while we were at that state park. And then when we got back to the car, we found Joe standing in the parking lot photographing something in the trees. And it turned out to be a whole bunch of common red poles, which are really beautiful birds. They're like the size of little sparrows, but they have these beautiful dark red crowns and breasts, and they were really cool. And then on the second or third day, we were driving to the bog again, and I looked out the window from my back seat and I saw a sundog, something that I did not even know existed. It is, I guess it occurs when the weather is exceptionally cold and I think maybe particles in the sky freeze, but it creates a halo around the sun. So the sun was rising and there's this huge frozen halo around the sun. And I was like, what is that? At first I thought it was a rainbow because I just saw one part of it. But then as we drove past an open field, I realized this thing went all the way around. It was like a giant circle. And so we pulled off, or we pulled over to check it out. And the more we looked, the more we realized it was actually a double halo. And it was the coolest thing I've ever seen. Matt, of course, being the naturalist, was like, it's a parhelion. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what? It's also called a parhelion or a mock sun, but most people call it sundog. We saw it the next couple of days in a row. I even saw it from the airplane when we took off from Minneapolis to head home. And that looked really amazing underneath the wing of the plane. And you could see the shadow of the airplane inside the center of it. It was wild. I've never seen anything like it. Very, very cool. And then on the last day, it was really funny. The night before the last day, we were going to check out of our Airbnb, but we had planned to sleep in late and then drive to Minneapolis. Because by the way, we were getting up at like 4 o'clock in the morning every single day. Like we wanted to be on site when the sun rose. And so for me, I wanted to make sure that I was like out of the shower and out of the bathroom before the guys got up. So I was getting up at like 4:30. We were leaving before 6. 6 and then like driving an hour to get to where we needed to be before the sun came up. And so like crazy early mornings, and we're the night before the last day we were going to sleep in. And then Matt was like, and by the way, Matt somehow knows people everywhere we go. We're in Minnesota and people are walking up to him going, "Are you Matt Felperin?" Like, this is how well known he is in the bird world. I was really impressed, and I know he enjoyed being recognized too. So we're running into people that Matt knows, and he's texting them the night before, and somebody had texted to say that they saw a sharp-tailed grouse in a field on their way to seeing a northern hawk owl, and sent us pictures. And what's significant about sharp-tailed grouse, and really any grouse species in the United States right now, they're very similar to prairie chickens. They're kind of they all look like chickens. If you know what a ruffed grouse is, which is what we have here in Virginia, they all look very similar, but their habitat is threatened. And so all of the species are drastically declining. They prefer grassland habitats, and grassland habitats are threatened by development and climate change right now. So these birds in the spring, which we didn't even realize they were already starting this, but they were doing like mating displays on their leks, which is like, the area where they breed and where they do these like dances. And like, that's something that you see on Nat Geo that you think you're never going to see in real life. So when Matt found out that somebody else we knew had seen these sharp-tailed grouse performing their mating dance on their leks, he was like, "We've got to get up early. We've got to be there before sunrise." Poor Joe, I thought, was going to have an absolute meltdown. He was exhausted. We were all exhausted. We all thought we were going to be sleeping in the next morning. And Matt starts making the case for why we absolutely have to do this, because with the species declining, will we ever get this opportunity again? And so we all finally agreed. But after like this big quarrel that the two of them had, that I was in the background laughing at because it was just too funny. So we decided we were all going to get up crazy early. Of course, we had to check out of the Airbnb before we could even leave. I mean, I think I was up at like, I don't even know. It was 4:00 or earlier or something stupid like that. And then we're outside and it's 18 degrees outside. Nobody can feel their fingers the moment we step out the front door. It was one of those mornings. So we were driving out. We found the owl. We saw another great gray on the side of the highway. It was the closest one that I think we saw the whole time out of the whole 5 days that we were there. It was literally right on the side of the road. And it's so amazing to me that they are so unbothered by people. They just continue hunting and living their little owl lives. And they don't seem to be even the least bit concerned that people are watching. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be mindful that we aren't disrupting them. But at the same time, just really interesting that they just continue doing what they're doing right next to roads and landing on some photographers' cameras and crazy things. But we got to see another great gray. We saw the northern hawk owl. And then we were driving along the side of the road. We knew we were kind of near where the grouse were. And I looked out and saw them in the distance. And we didn't get to see them doing the mating dance because we got out there a little bit late. We had stopped for the owls. So that part was a little unfortunate. But then we continued on to the airport and we saw huge flocks of snow buntings. I've seen snow buntings in Virginia, but I've only seen like one or two at a time. And this was like flocks of 50 to 100. And they were taking off from these snow-covered farm fields up into the sky where the sun had rose and there was the sun dog around the sun. And here are these snow buntings flying by. It was like something out of a dream or a movie. I don't know. It was just incredible. And then I'm just the last one, I swear, I'm going to say one more and then I'm going to be done. I saw a ring-necked pheasant. And yes, we have them in Virginia, but they're not native, is my understanding, is that they're here because some people have released them. So you don't see them often. I've been looking for one for years and years. Every time one is spotted in Virginia, I show up and I never find it. But we were driving down the road and I'm like, what is that on the side of the road? And Matt slows down and sure enough, it is this beautiful beautiful male with all of these incredible colors. I mean, think of a peacock, kind of looks like that, but without the big fanned out tail. It's just this very long, sleek pheasant with gorgeous, gorgeous rainbow striking colors. I mean, it was awesome. So saw that and then headed off to the airport. So ended a very epic trip. Things that we were hoping to see that we didn't see. We wanted to see snowshoe hare. We never found one. Wolves. There are wolves up there in that part of Minnesota. Now, Joe says he saw one. We were driving down the road on the way home at the end of one night. The sun had just set and we drove past a side street and he looked over and there was a wolf trotting across the road. Now, Joe has been out to Yellowstone to photograph wolves. So if he says there was a wolf, I believe him. I believe that he knows what a wolf looks like. But by the time we turned around and got back over to where he had seen it, all we saw were tracks in the snow. And we were kind of following the tracks until they ended up in somebody's backyard. And we were like, okay, we can't trespass in someone's backyard. But Joe saw the wolf, but didn't get any pictures. The rest of us didn't. And then I think we were all kind of hoping for a snowy owl. I've seen several snowy owls, even here in Virginia, but I was hoping to see one on this trip and we didn't. But otherwise, absolutely incredible. Go check out the stories in the saved highlights on Instagram and let me know what you think. Tune in next week when I dive into my list of essential spring adventures across Virginia, from waterfall hikes in Shenandoah National Park to elk viewing in Appalachia. The warming season brings excellent opportunities for paddling, wildlife viewing, boating, backpacking, dark sky programs, and more. Don't miss out on this planning list for your spring adventures. Virginia Outdoor Adventures is inspired by and supported by listeners like you, which is why your messages and feedback mean so much to me. You can text me directly by clicking on Send Jessica a Text Message in your show notes. I answer questions, respond to comments, and share your feedback on the show. Never miss a new episode. Sign up for my email newsletter and receive my listener resource guide with the top podcast episodes, a Virginia Outdoor Bucket List, and exclusive brand discounts for my listeners. Click on Newsletter Sign Up in your show notes or visit virginiaoutdooradventures.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adventure on.